Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
This episode is presented by Dakota Resource Council. For nearly 50 years, DRC has worked across North Dakota to protect our land, water, and future.
Dakota Resource Council has definitely been shaping policy at the local, state, national levels. What role does DRC play in shaping that policy?
It's important for my people because we are grassroots people. We've always been grassroots people, Indigenous people, and having the tools and the resources that Dakota Resource Council can provide would up your game so much that, you can win and you can face these decision makers head on.
Become a member, volunteer, and take action, or donate today at drcinfo.org.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. And, yesterday we were talking about vaccines with Dr. Paul Carson from North Dakota State University. And during it, I made a crack about how I never talk about politics with my doctor. We mostly talk about that I'm overweight and things like that. The funny thing is I had a doctor's appointment yesterday, Chad. And I went into my doctor's appointment. And when my doctor came in the room, the first thing she started talking about was like, oh, I read one of your articles recently. And we talked about politics for like 20 minutes. So it just immediately made a liar out of me.
So you're fact checking yourself, but I'm guessing she still talked about your weight because that's what doctors do. But I bet she said she was proud of you because you've lost some weight.
I have lost some weight. There's been some setbacks, unfortunately. We're not going to get into that right now.
I think it's an important thing that we dive deep into your weight right now.
No, I don't think we should. No, and certainly that is not what our guest came on to talk about. Mark Watne, who is the president of North Dakota Farmers Union. And Mark, we brought you on to talk about tariffs. Obviously, hugely important for many of them. I mean, North Dakota is a production state. We make things, or we pull things out of the ground, whether it's ag products, energy products, and we ship them other places. Sometimes I wish maybe we did more of them while they're here. That's a whole other show. But tariffs are a big part of it because a lot of the stuff we produce goes to other countries. And a lot of it goes to Canada, which is by far our biggest trade partner as a state. So when the president of the United States is talking about trade tariffs on Canada, that's of huge economic importance to North Dakota. But Chad and I were joking a little bit before the show. We were trying to figure out what exactly is our tariff policy right now, because it's giving us whiplash. One thing we complain about sometimes is I think we have a real problem from presidential administration to presidential administration, where one administration has one set of policies, and then we get whiplash because a new one comes in and they throw a bunch out, and we've got all new policies. But now it seems like we're getting whiplash even within a single administration. So Mark, maybe you could start there. Do we know what our tariff policy is towards Canada right now?
Well, we really don't, as it's been kind of hit and miss on trying to understand it. And of course, that's a symptom of a bigger problem. And we've did a lot of work studying this. We've got some results out of NDSU from Dr. Wilson and others. We did this back roughly 8 years ago when we started down these paths. And what we quickly learned is North Dakota is impacted the hardest of all states because we export so much. And the retaliation is the problem. A lot of people confuse the tariff with the problem, which it is. But from a farmer perspective, it's a retaliation of what they do. And 9 times out of 10, that is when they come back, they come back against food or for commodities, and that's where we get hit the hardest. But the current policy, as I understand it, is obviously on basically Monday, we put the 25% on both countries. And by the end of the week, we backed off on the vast majority of all that, giving them another month. I think it's till like April 2nd until they have certain things they could do that might back off. So right now, it's a little hard to know. I think Mexico was fully backed up, but Canada, I thought, might be some select items. But that really becomes irrelevant because those countries will retaliate. And if they do it and then they, even get a relief from it, the commodity markets don't go back. They hang low or lower than they may have been based on expectation that this is short-lived. So this roller coaster is actually worse than having something done and adjusting to it. This is worse. It's bad enough having the tariff and the retaliation. Now we're making it worse.
Mark, can you sort of put a finer point on what does this mean for the family farmer in North Dakota? I mean, on one side, you're going to have an increase in, I assume, input costs around fertilizer and other things, but then lower commodity prices. So can you talk about what does that mean for a North Dakota family farmer? And then what does it mean for somebody like me who likes to eat?
Sure.
What does that mean for consumers?
Yeah. Well, I think that's really a good question. So let's start with the income stream for the family farm first. We will definitely have lower commodity prices even over time, which means that there will be other countries trying to replace our marketplace within Canada, Mexico, and China is the primary here. So you got Brazil, South America, South Africa, all these countries trying to fill the void that we create when we do the tariffs because those countries don't want to buy from us when we make bad partners. So commodity prices go down, don't recover necessarily as rapidly. Expenses on the other side, as you mentioned, the tariffs go on prices coming in. We pay more for fertilizer, for steel products. Our input costs go up. And interesting enough, they don't really ever come down. They don't flatten out. So now you're in a scenario as a family farmer where you've got a big blip up in price and then it may level off a little bit, but it doesn't come back down. And then you're selling into a market that is declined down to a point where you can't make a living. Now, the previous trade war we got into, we had pretty decent prices because there was just a lot of more economics that made prices a little higher. This time, we're sitting below the cost of production. There's already economic system coming out to agriculture because the prices are so low. This is going to take them down more. So now from a consumer perspective, you would assume, well, if commodity prices are lower, then of course food's lower, but that's not true. We've effectively gotten so much concentration in our place of food production, from beef slaughter to pork slaughter to many grocery chains that control the distribution system, that the reflection on commodity prices and what you pay is irrelevant. It doesn't matter if the price of wheat goes up or down, other than when it goes up, they go up. When it goes back down, they don't bring the price down again. So you're not really going to see the benefit from a consumer side. In fact, over time, you'll probably pay more. This is not a good policy. And especially the worst thing of this is we're doing it alone. Had we wanted to fight against China, we should have had Europe and Brazil with us. We should have went after the things that really are necessary to go after. We shouldn't have did this as we're the strongest in the world and we can simply do this. Because we will get replaced. And the question was, can we get it back? And I don't know that answer.
I would argue one of the things that made us the strongest in the world is we largely avoided policies like this. One thing that, I think that the President Trump's argument and people supporting him, what they're saying is essentially, I was looking at one of his social media posts and he was saying, hey, American farmers, get ready to sell more products into American markets. Because their argument is, well, it's going to balance out because, American producers can make food for Americans. And I guess I'm not an expert in this. I was thinking America produces far more food than Americans eat. So I don't know how that's going to work, but I guess respond to that, because that seems to be the defense of this.
It's, in a perfect world, that would probably be the case, but we are such great at production that we overproduce every market now. That's why we have such great quantity to export. And that's been driven by what we call an inexpensive food policy. So even though folks have been seeing inflation in food, we still have the cheapest food in the world. and it's because of this overproduction. Now, you can pick a few commodities out where that doesn't hold true, but for the primary wheat, soybeans, corn, and many others, we just overproduce the market. Well, at the same time, we're not getting support on renewable fuels. So that's a really wonderful place to use up that stuff in the domestic market, which could help us. But we need that renewable diesel market to really grow. That actually helps the crude oil industry with making themselves a little bit more acceptive to some of the buyers on the East and West Coast. So if you're going to do this, you got to develop those avenues to use our commodities up locally first. You can't go into the tariff first and expect that quick change because it's that slow to come. So, North Dakota, we're exporting just the vast majority. 750,000 people can eat the quantity of food we produce, not even a tenth of it. So we've got to have markets, whether it's other states or other countries, and that's the challenge. And I mean, it's just a symptom. So if you want a cheap food policy, you put really good farm program payments in, then you go out and you try to find an avenue to increase your sales and increase where your food goes so that you can raise market prices a little bit to help the farmers and not have taxpayer dollars going to farmers. But if you're going to go into the world market and make it less acceptable for U.S. products, and then we have too much production, you got a problem.
Mark, this week has been an absolute roller coaster, obviously, on the tariffs, and I worry that we can't recover. I mean, I'm seeing some of the news reports out of Canada that consumers up there are angry, right? They're throwing American bourbon out. They're not buying that. They're not coming down into North Dakota to go to our malls and those kind of things. I mean, how this is a big deal for your members. This relationship to Canada, who, as Justin Trudeau said, it's our biggest ally, always has been our biggest ally, and we picked this fight for no reason with no upside. How do you see this going in this relationship moving forward if we have this absolute chaos for the next 3.5, 4 years during the Trump administration?
Well, you're going to rely on what they're suggesting is there will be some government economic assistance, which again, there's really no money for that now like there was before, but that's what you're going to be reliant on. And then hopefully you get through it. But your point is well taken. The question will become is, do those buyers come back or do they hold tight like they have? Now, we don't know where these tariffs go now because they're on and off as we started the program with. But if they become a reality for a long period of time, the longer they're there, the more likely that these folks don't come back. Now, there's two things that drive economic markets as far as commodities go. One is the availability of supply. Currently, we have excess world stocks of most commodities. We have a lot of hungry people, but they don't have money to buy. So you're sitting in a situation where we can keep the pipelines relatively full. We've only had two major demand cycles, one in the 70s where we really took off with our foreign exports. It was the Russian wheat crisis and the fact that the world wanted, and we opened up our floodgates and overproduced the marketplace to feed the world. It wasn't a bad plan. It was a good plan at the time. The second time was with ethanol. We've seen a tremendous price increase based on demand. Now all commodity prices are based on supply and where they're held. So if you're going to hold the U.S. supplies in the U.S. because you're killing your foreign markets, we're going to be in a depressed marketplace for a long period of time.
Ooh, that's tough news. Let me ask you this: was there a problem here that we needed to solve? And I realize that President Trump is using some of these tariffs in pursuit of other policy objectives that really aren't related to agriculture specifically. He talks a lot about immigration and fentanyl. I really don't know. I don't know that those are big problems at our northern border, but he talks about that today. He announced, more tariffs on Russia. And I guess the stated goal is to try to bring them to the table for peace talks with Ukraine. But I guess, was there a problem with our trade with Canada? With our existing deals? Was there something? Because I heard, and the reason I'm asking this, I heard Senator Heidi Heitkamp say that the tariffs were a solution in search of a problem. And I was wondering about that. Like, was there a problem here at all that needed to be addressed?
Not that's being brought to the table. So, you never have what this perfect world, and most people love to talk about a perfectly free market. Well, there isn't really a perfectly free market in the sense of trade, because every country has a certain amount of policies that they find to be in their interest. So we have ours, Canada has theirs, Africa has their, Europe. Now, some of that can be overcome in a trade negotiation and when you set up trade deals, but you never get 100% perfect. So I think Senator Heitkamp's relatively correct on this. This is a problem that didn't really need a solution, specifically in the way we're trying to accomplish it. Should we be negotiating trade agreements and enhancing the opportunities for farmers on both sides? Should we be trying to come together on avenues where science-based information is how we trade rather than based on people's thought processes of whether they like something or not? Yes. But you don't solve that with a tariff. You're not necessarily going to influence the marketplace to a level where you think that you can force a product upon somebody because of you're wanting it simply to change. So the way I look at it is, if a customer wants something a certain way, you can eventually scientifically maybe prove them that you're supplying it to them. But if they truly desire that, you have to meet the marketplace. That's what every business out there does. So I don't think there is. And it really was my question out there. What's the end game here? And because I was in DC Monday and Tuesday, I said, what are we going to win? What do we end up with at the end of this? And there isn't any answers coming forward.
Mark, generally, North Dakota agriculture has all been on the same page when it comes to things like tariffs and what happened. And we saw on Monday, and again, we had tariffs, we didn't have tariffs. It's a tough week. But one of the other major ag groups came out and basically said, not that they support these tariffs, but there might be short-term pain, long-term gain sort of thing. If you're a policymaker and North Dakota agriculture isn't all on the same page on something as simple as this, I mean, how do you get those folks to maybe be a little bit more realistic on how this is going to affect the farmers and ranchers? I don't want you to go after Farm Bureau or anything like that, but it does create some confusion for people not really understanding what this means for farmers and ranchers in the state.
Yeah, and I think Farm Bureau, they have members that take positions, and they can certainly make their mind up for themselves. But I think when it takes us right back to that question: what is the gain? What do we win? And I think you should ask them that. Now, you can look at, if you look at a certain commodity, maybe get into the fruits and vegetables or something like that, that you have a localized market that it ends up competing with some foreign imports. You probably can find a few gains. But that's very limited. It's got to be a perishable product. It's got to be something that probably only lasts 6 months in storage, or products like that, which, most countries try to supply themselves. So you can see maybe some potential. But for the vast majority of everything we produce, especially in North Dakota, it really does hit us hard. And another thing, I heard, well, you just need to switch crops. Well, we grow, let's just say realistically about 30 crops. I know we can grow 44, but realistically, we grow probably 30 different crops in North Dakota. They follow the price of corn, and they follow the price of wheat and soybeans on the Chicago Board of Trade. And even the world market is set by the Chicago Board of Trade. So when you really look at this, when you upset the apple cart and keep a whole bunch of supply of those three commodities in the United States, the Chicago Board of Trade is going to lower prices, and all of those other crops are going to follow it down. So the option of just simply switching crops, or the option of finding some efficiency when you're already not probably able to go into your bank and put a very positive cash flow plan together, this is a huge hit. And I mean, I'm taking calls from a lot of younger generation farmers that say, we're on that edge, and everybody says, let's get this next generation out here. Well, when the vast majority are saying they can't make it through this unless something happens, or we need huge economic assistance from the government, we've got a huge problem. And I wish somebody would identify these problems before we make choices on a federal level that have such a great impact.
It seems like we're using American farmers as a cudgel in an international political fight without spending a lot of time thinking about how that's going to impact those farmers. And one thing you've touched on it a little bit, but I really want to drill down to the uncertainty aspect of it, because when I write about regulations and everything else, I think that's such a hugely important consideration. and really speaks fundamentally to the type of society we are. Why do we write the laws down in the first place? So that we know what they are and they're predictable and we can know when we're following them and we know when we're not following them. But when we create chaos and we have this whiplash back and forth, and so I'm trying to think, like, if I was a farmer and I know very little about the practical aspects of farming because I've never done it, but I'm thinking farmers are planners, right? They have to think ahead. And when they decide I'm going to plant a certain crop this year, like you just said, they're kind of placing a bet on what they think crop prices are going to be when it's time to bring that crop to market. So they're trying to think ahead, what's it going to be? And then that impacts all sorts of other decisions about planting and equipment and everything else. I mean, if you're running this business, you want some relative certainty. And I know in farming with weather and everything else, there's not a lot of certainty to begin with. But when we're adding this extra vector of chaos, I talk about that a little bit because there's got to be a lot of farmers thinking, what do I do?
Oh, you're definitely right, and that word certainty is really a good word because you do try to make those plans, and the positive side of farming is you kind of get to refresh each spring, at least in North Dakota, it's in the spring as we call it, and you make those plans, and of course, if you have some baseline things through crop insurance or baseline through a farm program, or if you have a marketplace that's somewhat in a positive area where you can lock in some prices, all those things become those tools for that certainty. Right now, you've got a situation where you don't know. I mean, you literally don't know where the farm bill is going to go. There's actually come talk within certain things about cuts to crop insurance. There's talk about these tariffs on and off, and the marketplace has responded negatively. And, unless you are on the right side, and that's a guess too. A lot of people think, well, why didn't you just buy earlier? Well, you just don't know. Sometimes the best process is because of what you expect the market to do is to wait to buy. Expectations of where fertilizer prices and stuff might go. So you could just be in a luck of a draw. You could have just outguessed wrong and end up in a bad scenario. So you're right. Having a little bit of certainty, having a little bit of ability to make the actual business decisions without being that pawn and being outside of the ability to, make changes that are being chosen by somebody else is really important in agriculture.
And to be clear, there's never 100% certainty. There's just not. And especially we don't know if there's going to be a natural disaster, whether it's a natural disaster here or in some important market that we sell into. We just don't know. So the more uncertainty we create, it's just extra levels of complexity that we just don't need. Anyway, so sorry.
No, but you're exactly right, and that's what farmers, the farmers that are most successful practice a certain amount of risk management, and you can control what you can control, but you can't control this stuff. You have no control. So your best place decision might be the worst decision you made using the current information, and then everything changed that you didn't have any control on.
Mark, the other thing that I would imagine is creating some chaos across the state, and I want your take on this, is sort of the Doge cuts. We're seeing less employees at FSA. Rural development is losing employees. There's been freezes, unfreezes of different programs. Like removing the tariff chaos, but is that creating issues, or do you have your members, or you're nervous about like what? Even grants that they thought maybe they were getting are now frozen, and there's nobody at the local FSA office anymore to help them. How are folks feeling about that?
Yeah, that's causing a lot of angst in many farmers, especially those ones that are sitting on contracts that may or may not be honored. First of all, I think you got to separate. There's kind of the ongoing NRCS programs that it's most likely that they will get their funding. So those aren't quite as risk. Now, will there be funds for them in the future? That's to be determined, but the current ones should get their funding. But the ones that were started under the IRA or started under other programs that were, conservation minded or soil health minded, some dealing with climate, there's actually contracts that have been told they're not going to get their remaining payment, even when they did do the event. So you got maybe 25% that you haven't received yet. That's a real frustration. Now, some of those programs just won't continue forward because, you won't sign people up if you don't think there's money. So that's huge. Now you go into this budget reconciliation process and look at this gap you have. You have a $230 billion cut to farm programs on the House side. You got a $1 billion cut on the Senate side. We don't know who wins this battle, but somebody will. Pretty obvious there's going to be some cuts. There probably is no way, even if somebody doesn't like food stamps or SNAP, that you can find that much savings without impacting those people on food stamps. It's utterly ridiculous to suggest you can. There's not that much waste and fraud. In fact, I would beg the question, if there's $1 billion or $2 billion of waste and fraud, that would mean we really did a bad job. But with that said, that means you're going to shift that over to other portions in the farm program if those numbers are real. And that's going to hit crop insurance and the Farm Bill program, which everybody says they're going to enhance. Well, you can't enhance without additional dollars. So there is angst. There's a lot of concern. I had 3 different stories on when Farm Bill might get worked on. A couple House people said, 1st of April will start. Well, that's not going to happen, plain and simple. Then we had the potential of, in the Senate, thought we could do something by the end of summer, a little more open to that's a potential based on how the budget process goes here, if they can wrap it up or pull it together. But the reality is, one told me that he didn't think we'd get one this year. Well, then we're in the 3rd year of extension, assuming they extend it, and we got a program that isn't working. Doesn't make sense. It's just tough. So yeah, I'm getting calls, and it's a lot of younger people without a lot of equity built up that are really in a pinch. And the bankers are starting to call. I've not had a lot, but they do the calculation. They use the numbers. They can see this doesn't cash flow where we're currently at, and it's getting worse. So that's the problem.
Mark, the political dynamics of this are hard to ignore. I was looking, and you don't represent the Farm Bureau, and I don't expect you to comment on it, but I was looking at one of their statements recently and wrote about it, where they seem to be squirming. Because on one hand, I think they have a constituency that is very pro-Trump. I suspect your organization has a lot of Trump voters in it as well. And so there is a loyalty to Trump out there that is unusual in American politics. And it creates this weird dynamic where on one hand, what is going on with tariffs and everything, even just the way Trump is handling it, the uncertainty and chaos that he's creating is objectively bad for the agriculture industry. But on the other hand, it's hard to just come out and be critical. Okay, it's hard to come out because there's a lot of people that just sort of fanatically, you say one critical thing and you've got Trump derangement syndrome and we're off to the races. So how do you navigate that where it's like, we just need to really set personalities aside and really be focused on what this means as policy? That's got to be challenging for you right now.
Oh, it is, and you're exactly right. I mean, we have about 70,000 members in the state, and you guarantee that 60 or more % are Republicans and vote a certain way, and then there's some independents and some Democrats both. So you definitely have to navigate. So we do our best. We don't donate to campaigns, so we don't make any commitments. We try very hard not to be partisan, and then we become very politically, and we become issue based. And we try to go out as a farm organization in so-called stay in our lane where we have the most possibility of being effective. So we focus really a lot on farm programs and so forth on purpose to, where we know our members are and what they tell us through the grassroots process of develop policy. It actually becomes relatively simple when you don't bow to one side or the other. You can stay very consistent on where you've been, and we're there. We support family farm agriculture. It's our job to find avenues to enhance their income streams and to enhance what they do through government programs, through the marketplace. And that's what we fight for. So when we go to state legislature, when we go there to Washington, we make the same comments. We stay very consistent. We don't follow any whims. I find that that's made us very popular, and that's just where we stay.
Mark, as we're sort of wrapping things up, you said you've been getting calls from folks that are nervous, young producers and that kind of thing. What are you saying to them to sort of try to calm those nerves because it is hard to say everything's going to be fine with all this chaos going on and people are really nervous about their livelihoods. But what do you say to them when they call? What would you say to listeners who are maybe thinking that same thing?
Well, I'm a product of the 80s, so I've lived through some pretty awful time frames that they were slightly worse because you had substantially higher interest rates, but we fought our way through. So I say to these folks, I say, agriculture will be up and down, and there will be good times again. You have to keep that in mind. The question is how you get to that point. How do you arrive? So really think through your business plans, really look at what's essential, what's necessary, and start to build a system of success stories, the short-term side. And most folks, farmers, are fairly resilient and they can handle a little bit. But that's back to what we know. What's the end game? If there's an end game, it's a little different. But if there's no end game, so I really do encourage them to understand that there is ways that this can change and get better. And there's people out there working. You're not alone, and hopefully we'll get some really good results. And I do believe, I mean, just the fact that we backed off on these tariffs for even just a month means there's a whole lot of public pressure coming on our senators and our House members to understand that this is not a real acceptable thing. So I'm hoping for a quicker resolution, obviously, but we've got to get back out there and keep working. I'm going back out at the end of the month again to keep working on it. That's what we do.
Although I suspect he'd never admit it, I think some of that pressure you're talking about and some of those immutable realities about these markets may be why we saw the president back off. Whatever his given reasons. Mark, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you guys, and keep doing what you do. Tell the story.
Thanks, Mark.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
This episode is presented by Dakota Resource Council. For nearly 50 years, DRC has worked across North Dakota to protect our land, water, and future.
Dakota Resource Council has definitely been shaping policy at the local, state, national levels. What role does DRC play in shaping that policy?
The industry is talking to people one at a time, and what DRC does is organize local groups and listen to people, and our voices are heard.
Become a member, volunteer, and take action, or donate today at drcinfo.org.
Welcome back. Just finished our conversation with the North Dakota Farmers Union President Mark Watne, who has a tough job right now, Chad. I mean, not just because his industry, there's a lot of uncertainty for his industry right now, which obviously is a core, powerful, hugely important industry for the state of North Dakota. Just the political realities that he has to thread the needle on. It's kind of interesting to watch. I mean, it would be almost fun to watch if it weren't so bloody serious and so many people potentially being hurt, whether they work in the ag industry or not. But I mean, watching this happen, rural America, farmers, I mean, that is a core constituency for Donald Trump. And this is bad for them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, President Watne is dealing with something that I think we are all dealing with, and it's like when facts and reality don't matter, and it's just, this is my guy, I'm going to follow him into the fire if need be. I mean, I think President Watne does a really good job of trying to thread that needle, but it's very, very difficult. But it is hard, and I think we saw it with with Darrell Lice's comment about it is hard to justify these tariffs if you represent rural America. It is hard to justify it. Lice tried to, but that was quite a squirmy little song and dance that he did that you wrote about there. But there's no upside for North Dakota with these tariffs. And I think most people, if they're thinking about this clearly, would agree.
And I mean, the pain will come. I mean, if it gets to a point where Trump lets some sets in, because I think a lot of the market, like, they can't just react to everything Trump says all the time. Sometimes you have to stand back and kind of see where it's actually going to land, because you don't know where he's going to land. Yeah. It's all over the map. He's a chaos agent, and we just don't know. By the way, did you remember from Ferris Bueller? This clip has been circulating from Ferris Bueller, where the Ben Stein, the actor, he's the teacher, and he's delivering like an economics, and it's super boring, and he's like, Bueller. He went, you realize what he's talking about, like the Smoot-Hawley Act? He's talking
it's been too long.
If you go back and watch that clip, it is hilarious because it is so perfect for what's going on right now, where he's talking about the Smoot-Hawley Act and how we tried to cure some economic issues with tariffs, and it led us into the Great Depression. It was just so It's like he was talking about now. By the way, Ben Stein was an actual economist and a conservative, like supply side. Anyway, it's just kind of remarkable how far Republicans have gotten away from those roots. It's just it's kind of hilarious. Anyway, you should look it up. It's the Anyone Bueller. Anyone. Great movie. You should watch Ferris Bueller anyway this weekend.
So, fun story. When I think I was in 8th grade, our last day of 8th grade, we got to walk over to the movie theater at the Kirkwood Mall from Walker Middle School, and we watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It was not new, but we got to watch
How
it.
old are you? That was
Yeah,
still.
no, it was not new. It was slightly dated at that point, but how old are you?
That's a great movie. That's a great movie. So yeah, interesting times for the agriculture industry.
Yeah, and I think I just want to really the you brought up the point to him, and we talked about it before we recorded the idea that business and farms are businesses, ranches are business, needs some sort of economic certainty. If it's tax policy or if anything like that, it makes it very, very difficult, and especially if you're in agriculture, where one storm event and you lose everything except for if you have crop insurance. I mean, a little bit of certainty would be really helpful. And if we want young farmers and ranchers to stay in this state and to stay working as family farmers, these kind of things are really devastating.
It would be hard. And again, I think it's really important to think of it that way, because a lot of the policy objectives that Donald Trump is trying to achieve really don't have anything to do with agriculture. And granted, his tariffs aren't just about agriculture. We're talking about them from the perspective of agriculture because that's our most important question in North Dakota. That's the lens through which we're seeing this for obvious reasons. But it just seems like we're using this in pursuit of other things. Like it's President Trump trying to leverage America's economic might, which is a real tool that we have, no question. But he's trying to leverage it, and there's a reason why we don't do this stuff. There's a reason why this went out of fashion in the last century. It doesn't work well, and it hurts us about as much as it hurts the people that we're trying to hurt with it.
When I think picking a fight with Canada for no good reason just makes no sense. The one thing that it is doing is I don't think Justin Trudeau has been this popular in Canada in several years. I mean, there is something to be said about being the prime minister and being able to take on, your neighbor to the south, who I think a lot of Canadians don't necessarily love in the first place.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be
the childish. I mean, even beyond the policy of it all, some of just the childish, stupid things that were calling Canada the 51st state. I love Canada. And one of the reasons why I think Canada and America have gotten along historically is because we're so alike. There are a lot of, but they're not Americans. They're Canadians. And that's fine. I'm glad they're proud of their identity, and they should be. I just want to be good neighbors with them. And the other day, Kristi Noem was visiting, and I'm forgetting the name. It's a little library in Vermont, and it actually straddles the border with Ontario. The international border runs right through the library. So it's kind of a tourist attraction.
Yeah.
You can go in one side and come out in Canada on the other side. Anyway, so she visited there, and she was doing this thing where she was like standing on the border in the library, and she's like, America first. And then she stepped over and said, now I'm in the 51st state. She's a cabinet official. And is it small and petty? Yeah. But you think Canadians aren't irritated by that? Why are we poking our neighbors like this? I don't get it.
Yeah, I just read an article about the border crossings in North Dakota and how they've slowed down just dramatically over the last several weeks, almost to a trickle of nobody coming south from Canada. And I'm actually going up to Winnipeg next Friday, and I'm really interested to see. I'm going to a hockey game. How are Canadians going to respond to the national anthem? How are Canadians going to treat us as Americans? What does it look like in terms of the border crossing and all that kind of thing? Because if I was Canadian, I wouldn't like this crap at all that the United States and Donald Trump is doing.
I'm an American, and I don't like
it. True, yes.
And you are as well. So I don't get it. I don't know what even we're trying to accomplish. And even if you could argue that there are elements of our trade agreements with Canada that could be improved, okay, this isn't the way.
Yeah.
This isn't how you do it. And you asked a really good question too. What are the long-term cultural implications? Because politics is downstream from culture. So if we create Canadians and Americans, usually we get along famously. A little gentle ribbing back and forth, right? But for the most part, we get along pretty well. So what does this do? Like if we have a cultural shift and we know what Donald Trump is capable of in terms of changing the culture. So if we change the culture of friendliness and friendship and peaceful trade relations with Canada, if we change that, are we going to get it back?
I heard a statement from the Kentucky Distillers Association. You know, they make bourbon down there and they send it up to Canada. And up in Canada, they're getting rid of the bourbon. They're only selling Canadian whiskey these days. And this guy in Kentucky pointed out this doesn't just affect like the people who own these companies. It's also the people who make the barrels. It's also the people who actually do the distilling. It's the distribution people. I mean, this is a lot of Americans that are affected by these sort of silly games being played by the White House. It's not just, it's not a game. I mean, these are real lives being affected. People's really ability to make a living and feed their families are at stake. And Trump, from one day to the next, seems to have a different opinion on how he wants to handle this.
Yeah, if you're a business owner, even if you're a massive corporation and you lose a big market and you just can't sell products there anymore, or the people won't buy them anymore, what are you left to do? You have to lay people off, right? What else can you do? I mean, unless you could find another market, which is unlikely. Markets the size of Canada's aren't just laying around.
And to what ends? Again, to President Watney's point, with what goal? I mean, Trump keeps saying it's about fentanyl, and that's not it. I mean, I saw some ridiculous number of how many pounds of fentanyl have been caught at the Canadian border. Virtually nothing compared to the Mexican border. You can't just say, hey, fentanyl's coming in from Mexico, so therefore we have another border and it's got the exact same problem. I mean, it's silly, and we're picking a fight with our friends. And at a time in this world that's sort of uncertain, we should probably try to have a few friends.
The one last point on this is the argument that Trump supporters make is that it's all posturing. He doesn't really mean it. He just postures it to get effective, to get him to the table, or to get him. It's all positioning to make a deal, right? Because that's what Trump's all about, is the art of the deal. But I guess my counter argument to that is, how many people do you hurt with your posturing? I mean, I get it. Like sometimes you got to use the bully pulpit. Sometimes, I mean, there's a time and a place for that. Don't get me wrong. But it's like the only tool Donald Trump has. And how many people are going to get hurt? Because that cudgel he's swinging and hitting these people with is made of people.
I think there's a lot of people looking at their 401ks over the last couple of weeks and thinking, I'm collateral damage, and whatever these games are that the White House is trying to play or thinks they're playing or not playing. Again, it's not a game. These are real life people who are being affected by things. And I worry that we live in this time where even if people start to get the ramifications of these decisions around tariffs, around how DOGE is being implemented. I think you and I have also talked about how I think the concept of DOGE might be okay. I mean, I think the idea of that there might be some inefficiencies and we can do some cuts at the federal government is something we should look into, but not like this, not just like overnight, 75% of the folks are gone. But I just worry that the people who have, who anything Trump does is the right thing, they'll figure out somebody else to blame, even when it starts to affect them personally.
I worry because making cuts is hard. Like cutting, as a conservative, I know how hard it is to advocate for cuts, because eventually, I mean, there's going to be a person who gets fired, right? Who loses their job. That's tough. It's tough to look that person in the face and say, well, we have too many people. We're going to have to let some people go. So that's a tough thing. They have a lot of political capital to do efficiency and cuts the right way, and it just feels like they're squandering it. So even as a conservative, like, you are doing this so stupidly and just creating, I mean, we may not be able to build the sort of consensus we have right now around cuts in the future. If we do it this way, this is such a stupid way to squander your political capital, which, like it or not, Trump had a lot of coming into office.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Democrats are in disarray. Republicans control the White House and Congress, granted slim majorities, but majorities nonetheless. And you're squandering it.
But could you imagine if they had done it in a way that sort of systematically went through the federal government and like cut with a scalpel, and how much like Democrats and Republicans alike would be like, yeah, I mean, I agree with some of these cuts that are going on. But what I think they risk doing is by just taking the sledgehammer approach to cut government, that people are going to miss a lot of these services, and then it's going to get just built right back up in the exact same way or even bigger moving forward because it's not being done efficient. If you're just saying, hey, we're going to close the Department of Ed and cut down and fire 75% of the staff with no sort of conversation about how that affects kids with disabilities and that kind of thing, that's not the way we should be doing this. This is not efficiency.
Yeah, no, you're right. And also sometimes we think of efficiency as only being about cuts, and it's not. In fact, sometimes just cutting and slashing can create less efficiency and
Right.
more expense because we have to then react to those cuts. And there's still certain like undeniable needs that are out there that have to be met. Places like North Dakota, most states in the union, I think probably all of them, have a constitutional amendment requiring us to provide education services. We are required. So if we create chaos, we still have to meet that constitutional obligation.
And I don't know if you saw that Senator Mathern has asked for sort of an OMB briefing on how the federal cuts might affect the state budget. All for that, because I think that the legislature is sort of ignoring the fact that a third or a fourth of our budget comes from the feds, and this chaos might affect the ability to do things like you said, education, human services. That I think that they need to be taking this into consideration much more when they're putting together the budgets, because there has to be some contingencies in place if all of a sudden a bunch of human services funding goes away for programs that we use matching dollars for, those kind of things. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up getting through the session and then they're back in 3 to 6 months to have to deal with some of these budget cuts that are
I
taking
mean,
place
they
at the
may,
federal level.
depending on what happens, but who the heck knows? In many ways, our state government's in the same position farmers are. Who knows what's going to happen?
Right.
Who knows? It feels
But
like anything could happen. And in some ways, I don't mind that. Like, it does feel like we've kind of broken through something and we're moving into an era where some things are possible that maybe were in the past. And I'll admit, that's a little bit exciting. I just wish that somebody like Elon Musk and Donald Trump weren't in charge of it. And maybe that sounds hypocritical. Like they won although Elon Musk won the election, was never on a ballot. I mean, that's what a weird situation. It's hard to even
he's
talk.
he's just some dude who's hanging out, right? I mean, and the president keeps claiming that he's not in charge of anything when it's convenient, and then he is in charge of things when it is convenient. I mean, this guy hasn't been confirmed for a job.
Yeah. Yeah, and won't be. I mean, he's not been appointed to anything. He's just there. All right. Speaking of the state, by the way, our state government doing some Doge stuff. I mean, that was one thing that Governor Armstrong talked about coming in, looking at boards and commissions and restructuring some of those things. We have boards and commissions that haven't met in years. Despite the fact that charitable gaming has exploded into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Somebody told me our like state gaming board, not the gaming commission that's in the attorney general's office, but we actually have a separate board for some reason, hadn't met in over a year.
Yeah, as one of our guests, I can't remember if it's Cleary or Bale or somebody like that had mentioned that they hadn't met for 2 years, but I'm all for that. If you're going to have the boards and commissions, make the boards and commissions work. If they're not working, get rid of them.
If they're not doing anything, then clearly we didn't need them.
Right.
So anyway, that's just some stuff. Legislature back in session this week. We as at the time we've recorded this, we've yet to have another floor session, so just a ton of committee work. What are you seeing? I mean, I guess the property tax bills in the Senate are big. We're going to have our guest today. Our second guest today was scheduled to be Dr. Amy Copas. I think we were going to talk about some of the school choice legislation, but that's making its way through. My weekend column's actually about Axman's bill, and I think politically they're going to have a really tough time if they stick to this, because there's two big obstacles to that. One is ag people don't have funding private school tuition is useless to them. And then on the other hand, you're going to have kind of a class war thing where, okay, I send my kids to public school, and under the current bill, I get $500 from an education savings account I could use for band camp or dyslexia therapy or a lot of cool things. That's great, right? But then I look at the private school people, and they get potentially, at the very least, they get double what I get because they send their kids to private school. I just don't see how that survives. I think that would
Yeah,
get.
and
I think it
we
would
should mention we're still gonna have Dr. Kopis on hopefully next week. She had some technical difficulties. She's out of state and wasn't able to join. I think that is the biggest political. I mean, obviously, I have a very strong opinion that I want this to fail, but I think one of the difficult things is the politics around this, right? I mean, on one hand, you're trying to do something for public school parents, and while doing something for private school parents. The more you do for public school parents, the more expensive this bill gets. And then you have people on the right who are like, well, this is just a giveaway to public schools. And so there's people on the right who are against the Axman bill, and we saw that on the Senate side. And then you have, the pro-public education folks who are like, well, we don't want, like me, I'm okay with all the other stuff, but I don't want to dip our toe on this all of a sudden public dollars for private schools. It's a very difficult thing to navigate. And I think I think what you put your finger on, if we're not treating everybody the same way, that's going to rub people the wrong way. I also think there's going to be something, if this happens to get to a point where the voters vote on this, I think there's going to be some people out there who the stuff that you and I have talked about, we like sending our kids to band camp and whatever. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be like, you know what, I sent my own kid to band camp. I don't like the idea of this public school side of things. I mean, we know how the voters are. I mean, it's a very sort of look at how this affects me and that kind of thing. I think this is going to be a tough pill when you add it all together for the public to swallow.
I think that if it gets to the ballot, there's a very real risk that you create enough antipathy towards the bill that it splashes over onto the good parts. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against making ESA dollars available for tuition. I have a problem with this tiered thing that they're doing, where if I only choose public school, I only get $500. Everybody else, the people sending their kids to private school get thousands. And I realize those additional dollars could make it possible for some families to choose private schools where they couldn't before, but it's not going to be enough. Their numbers aren't going to be big enough to defend this bill. So they really need to think long and hard about. And as somebody who, again, I love the ESA concept, and I really want school choice.
We have school choice. We have school choice.
Okay,
It's not government funded school choice.
you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Chad and I disagree on the nomenclature, but the cause of what I would define as school choice, which is funding some choice to go outside of the public school system to public schools to seek education, I think we run a real risk of doing a lot of damage to that cause if this gets referred to the ballot. If they don't do this the right way, I think they need to get rid of the tiers. Say every student gets the same amount of money, whether it's $500, $1,000. I don't know what the fiscal note would work out to be to make that palatable. Give everybody the same amount, and then say if you want to use it for tuition, great. You want to use it for school lunch, great. Your kid's got dyslexia, need some help, use it for that. You want to send your kid to computer camp, use it for that. Same amount for everybody. I think that's popular. I think that passes.
So I think the other thing to consider is I don't actually have a problem with the means testing, but it should be the same means testing for everybody, right? I mean, if we want to do a little bit more for people who are on lower levels of income, maybe we do a little bit more, but you can't treat private school parents on the means test and nobody else is on the means test and gets that lower amount. So I just want everybody to be treated the same way. Either they all get the same amount or everybody's on the same scale.
I don't mind the means test. I don't like the means testing because I feel like when we go down that road, we just make it so damn complicated. And I would really like this to be easy for North Dakotans.
Yeah, and I think
when you do the means testing, it's not just the rich people that have to go through that process. The poor people have to go through that process. Oh, I'd say poor people.
People file taxes though, Rob. I mean, I don't know that it would be as difficult as maybe some people would think it is to implement that. I think the other interesting thing is the mechanics of actually setting up these accounts and setting up this marketplace. I mean, I just read an article that this is something that's being done around the country, and there's a huge amount of competition between these marketplace companies as you can imagine to get, because this is a $3 million, they have $3 million to implement this program at DPI that will be given to a vendor. And it's led to a lot of, it's not corruption, but a lot of, you know how these, when you're working to get a government contract, you maybe pony up some PAC dollars, those kind of things that you're leading to some maybe less than straightforward relationships in some of these other states. But I do think, you know, I've been the same from the beginning. Treat everybody the same way. No public dollars for private schools. Let folks spend it on lunch. Let people spend it on dyslexia, whatever.
You and I know you don't. So you would never even if the dollar amount's the same for everybody,
No.
not like your tuition.
I think because it's a what we've seen in every other state where you sort of get the foot in the door of public dollars for private tuition, it explodes in future sessions. So it's what you see in most states. It's Arizona is a perfect example where they started with, okay, so just children on IEPs get the voucher, and it's a smaller amount, and then it expands and expands. And right now in Arizona, they're paying for 2 school systems essentially down there, and unfunded. Like they always appropriate something lower, and then it gets more expensive.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
don't know.
my ideological line in the sand, that I don't think tax dollars should fund a private school, particularly when often these private schools are pushing an ideology that that's just where I'm at.
Well, and this is the bone of contention between us. I disagree, and I think politically though, the tiered system I think is a fail. I think you put that before voters. The way it's constituted now, there's so many arguments. The rural people aren't going to like it. You got some class war stuff. I can't afford to send my kids to private school, so I get less. That's going to be tough to defend. I think if you made it the same for everybody, included tuition in, I don't think you have any problems with that at all.
I still
Politic-
like I still
politically.
think going to the voters, there is such animosity towards that one piece of private school tuition that it
I don't-
essentially takes the whole thing down.
I think it depends. I don't think the animosity is as great as you make it out to be. But we'd see.
Listen, when's the last time you watched a Class B basketball tournament when there was a small town team playing against Minot Ryan or Shiloh or one of those private schools? There is some internal animosity towards private schools in rural North Dakota because of Class B basketball.
Yeah, but the thing is you're making this about a choice, right? Like if we're all getting the same dollar amount, and I choose to spend mine on private school tuition, and you choose to spend yours how you want to spend it, I don't think. I
But
think
what about those people that don't have children and they're not getting anything from this at all? Where do they fall politically if they're giving an up or down on that? I mean, I think that's the question.
I think a lot of them probably still have grandkids or nieces and nephews or things like that, where they're still going to say, you know, it'd really be nice if my grandson could go to computer camp or space camp or something like that.
It is really interesting, like the conversations you have, because this is such a complicated thing with so many different sort of pieces of it. And I was talking to somebody about why this bill is bad. And they said, yeah, I think it's bad too. I don't want to pay for some other kid to go to music camp. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, however you get to know, but
Yeah.
that's the part I like.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But the problem is, the problem with accepting that sort of argument is you can make it about anything. Like they could say, well, why should I pay property taxes for parks that I don't use? Why should I pay property taxes for school? I never had any children. Why should I pay for it?
That's what private school parents are saying right now, and why they should get this voucher is, why should I pay for schools if I'm not using them? Right.
Yeah. Well, again, I would simplify it. I'd get rid of the tiers. Everyone gets the same amount. Use it. You know, let's have a strong list of ways you can use it, and we'll go from there. I think that's a good bill, and I think
I also think the fiscal note has to be based in reality. And I don't want to get into this, but right now the $58 million on the Axman bill that assumes only 50% usage from private school parents, that's just not based in reality. And so we need to have, if we're being fiscally responsible, we need to know how much these things are going to cost.
I agree. Any other predictions for that? I don't know, maybe we do predictions for the second half. Like what do you think is going to crop up here? We saw a lot of the culture war bills get slaughtered. If you were still alive. But what is this? I mean, this is rubber meets the road, there's a lot of very substantive policy that's got to get through these chambers.
There's going to be more money than the legislature is letting on at this point. And the reason I say that is I heard a report.
That's every session.
No, but I heard a report last night that they're currently overspent by like $300 million. And 2 years ago it was $1.8 billion at this point. And that's with duplicative property tax bills. So if you only pass one of the property tax bills, you're already have a surplus of $300 million. So I think you are going to see some increased spending on things like K through 12 education and maybe some other budget enhancements moving forward. And Rob, the viewers probably don't know this, but next Thursday is a big day. That's when Moody's comes in and gives their fiscal analysis for moving forward that sort of tells the appropriators how much money they're going to have. I think a lot of things will change on Thursday in terms of appropriations and how we fund things. But property taxes is going to get done. I think that we're still going to have fights to the bitter end on how the cap works, but there will be a cap. Property taxes gets done. I think most of the other cultural war stuff will go down. I think the book ban goes down. I think it might be a pretty straightforward second half of the session.
I kind of agree. The one thing on the caps, how strong do you think the House is? And granted, they sent 3 very different property tax bills with 3 pretty different caps to the Senate, but the House seems to be a little more open to opening the cap up and having a more liberal cap. Whereas the Senate, I mean, at least as measured by Senate Majority Leader David Hogue, I'm predicting that they're going to be tougher. If the Senate takes a tougher line on the cap, how much of a bone of contention is? I mean, does the House just roll over, or how hard do they fight on that? Do you think?
I don't know that there's a lot of political advantage to being for a loose cap at this point. I think the public probably likes a tighter cap. I think so. I don't want to say the House is gonna roll over on that, but I don't know if it's something. I think they're going to be closer to the Senate's position and Hogue's position. But I also think the interesting thing on the Senate side is you got an ag guy as the chair of Senate Finance and Tax. What does Mark Weber do for agriculture with these property tax bills moving forward? I think that's going to be something else.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting because, again, whatever property tax bill, if it's the governor's plan, Representative Nathy's bill, they probably need some of those rural votes to get it through.
Yeah,
and they're gonna have to get them some way, and that's such a tough issue because agriculture, it's commercial land, it's revenue producing land. We're really focused on trying to deliver primary residence tax credit. But farmers already have a residence exemption. Now, granted, it doesn't, like, there's some acreage requirements and things that maybe not every farm residence is qualifying right now, but we've already done some things for their residences.
I also think the other interesting thing is I think there's some leadership on the House side, particularly in the House Finance and Tax Committee, who would much rather be dealing with income taxes than property taxes right now. And so, is there going to be an effort like Hedlund did on the front side to slip some income tax relief in there to sort of sweeten up the pot maybe for the House to go along with the Senate? I think there'll be some games played. Obviously, I think that's a terrible idea. And then I think we put all of our eggs into property taxes moving forward and see where it goes.
Yeah, I agree. I guess if it, I don't know. I would need to see the proposal. But please keep income taxes out of the property tax bill. Let's do that separate. But I don't know. I mean, there's always horse trading at the end, right?
Yeah. And obviously the other thing is the mandatory minimums or truth in sentencing. I think that either gets defeated in the House or the governor vetoes it. And if the governor vetoes it, it's going to be an interesting fight.
I don't have any inside information, so I don't want to make it seem like I know what the governor's going to do because I don't. But I think he vetoes it.
There's no doubt. I don't have any insight other than what he said publicly. But
right,
when he was on the show and said, "I've never seen a mandatory minimum that works."
And also, the Attorney General has launched a withering rhetorical barrage on Governor Armstrong's Department of Corrections. a cabinet member, Colby Braun, director of the DOCR, and Armstrong hasn't wavered. Like he hasn't he's absolutely stood behind his guy. So I think that the governor would probably veto it. He's not going to say whether he will or not until the end. And then but I think a lot of people in the House know that the governor's going to veto it. I'm interested in what that does, though. Does that make them feel like they ain't gonna pass anyway, so I could vote against it? Or does it make them like, I don't want to deal with the attorney general, so we'll make the governor do the dirty work?
I don't want to deal with the attorney general. I don't want to deal with looking like I'm weak on crime. I'm going to vote for this thing and let Kelly take care of it for me, even though I know it's bad policy. That's an interesting perspective that I hadn't thought about, but I think there's probably some real merit to that possibility.
Yeah. So, and the other thing too is if the governor, what is the next 2 years? So say the governor vetoes it, sustains the veto. Our attorney general, who loves to stand behind a podium, I'm afraid we would have the next 2 years every time a crime is committed by somebody who's been in prison before in this state. We're going to have the attorney general there with a podium saying, see, I told you, I told you. I don't think that would be fair. I think that's anecdotal. I think there's a lot of reasons people recidivate. I think a lot of his comments about if we have tougher sentences, people won't recidivate, I think are overblown and exaggerated. But as a practical political cudgel, you could really see him beating up the governor over the next couple of years. Now, whether or not that would really hurt Armstrong or not, I don't know. But
what's your take on the fact that, I mean, you just mentioned that he likes to be at a podium, but I mean, Drew did have another press conference on this last week. It's like, I think we know where you're at on this, man.
I think he's just trying to keep the momentum going. That was my take. He really didn't have anything new to announce. I think he was we had some slow news cycles during crossover on the political beat. And I think he was probably trying to take advantage of some of that. I noticed he had his Be Worthy mug sitting prominently on his desk. It's so clear politically what he's trying to do there. He sees law enforcement as an important constituency for his political career. He views this legislation as ingratiating himself to them. And I really think that's what a lot of this is about. Yeah. It's about Drew Wrigley has an issue that plays very, very well with the constituencies that he likes.
So one other bill, obviously, on this side is the Senate Bill 2307, the book ban, the arrest librarians bill. I have to give the arrest librarians bill.
Yeah, I like that.
I have to give a shout out to the folks who are organizing against this right to read. They had a read in last Saturday, and Aaron and Evan and I participated in it. It was super cool. I mean, it was just like hundreds of people just sitting outside the libraries in I think 14 or 17 different communities, just reading and saying, we support our libraries and our librarians.
They did something similar last session. And we attended the one at the Minot Public Library. We weren't able to get down to the one this time around, but it was, it was very, very heartening. Actually organized out of Minot, by some fine Minot librarians who I know very well. So they did a great job for that. And I hope lawmakers listen. If you are for limited government, we do not have a problem with this. We have apparatus set up as it is, where if you find a book that's objectionable, maybe you don't think it's shelved right, maybe you don't think should be in the library at all, you could challenge this. Our libraries are not the problem. If you're worried about kids seeing pornography, the library is not the problem. This is a teen panic, right? Remember the satanic panic when we were kids and everybody was worshiping Satan and everything? It's bunk. It's baloney. It's made up. It's exaggerated. We don't have a problem. And if you don't believe me, go down to your damn library and look around. There's not a problem there.
Yep, it's actually a lovely place. Before we read as part of the read-in, Evan and I were looking for a book for a book report that he's doing, and I will tell you, the librarian in the children's section literally dropped everything to help him find a book that worked for him. It was awesome.
Super helpful people. And our libraries are about so much more than books. I mean, we're talking about books because that's what this is focused on, but the amount of work they do, they make community rooms available, they hold events. You can check tools out. As somebody who's not very handy and I don't want to have to buy, if I need, a specialized tool for something, a project around the house, instead of buying one, I check one out from the library. You know how much money that saves me? You could check out board games. My kids have checked out robots. They've learned programming. They have 3D printers. It's amazing. It's amazing.
You know what Evan checked out this last week?
What's
is
that?
a backpack full of ghost hunting equipment. He recently saw a show about ghost hunting, so now I've got these weird little sound makers in my house. They're like, "Did you hear that?" I was like, "No, I didn't hear that. That's static." So thank you, Bismarck Public Library.
My wife and we're so into Ghost Hunters. When we got the Ghost Hunters, the show, I don't even know if it's on air anymore, but we were so into it when we went on our honeymoon when we got married. We got married in December, and I talked her into going to the Rockies in January. So we went to Estes Park. We stayed at the Stanley Hotel, which was the inspiration for the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. We stayed there and we went on the ghost tour. And at night we did some EVP sessions trying to find ghostly.
I went there in the middle of the day once and took the tour, and I was terrified. I couldn't imagine staying there and like doing all the real stuff.
Oh, we were sneaking around. I've always been fascinated by ghost stories. I've never had an experience or anything like that. But I think the history of it fascinates me. I like a good ghost story. Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Um,
Good stuff.
yeah, that's what we did for our honeymoon, if you can believe. My saint of a wife.
Well, I mean, not to brag, but Aaron and I went to Wrigley Field to watch the Dodgers play the Cubs.
Yeah.
Romance, baby, romance.
Hey, before we go, we got another some feedback to our feedback line, which, by the way, if you want to call and leave a voicemail or a text, I promise nobody will answer if you call. Like, if you're afraid about talking to an actual human being, you don't have to worry about that. If you call, you'll just leave a voicemail, or you can send a text, and we'll react to it on air. Sandy from Devil's Lake writes, "I am loving this. I found you via TikTok and been creeping you ever since. Can we please talk about Lori Van Winkle from Minot, that state representative Lori Van Winkle from Minot, who said women's wombs were broken, but failed to support those children in school lunches, the hypocrisy." Anyway, loving the conversation. Thank you for keeping these topics in the front. Sandy, thank you for listening. Appreciate it. And we did talk quite a bit about Lori Van Winkle. Her comments about women's wombs were repugnant and inaccurate and stupid. And I, as far as her vote in favor of school lunches, I don't want to condemn people. School lunch, that was a big price tag. I think there are valid reasons to look at something like that and say, can we afford it? I don't think everybody who votes against that bill hates children. I think it's unfortunate, but I do look at the priorities of somebody like Lori Van Winkle and think those are not priorities that should be in elected office.
Yeah, and the other thing I take away from this is we are huge on TikTok at Plain Talk ND. We are huge on TikTok.
We are. There's a lot of people following us on TikTok. Or not, no, I shouldn't say there's a lot of people following. A lot of people viewing our videos already. So that's been great to see. I think our clip with Representative Lauser talking about his vote on the same-sex marriage resolution and how he evolved on that and came to change his mind got over 10,000 views. So doing pretty good there. And thank you again to Representative Lauser for coming on. That was a tough conversation for him. And
I've gotten a lot of feedback on that interview, and some people are like, "Yeah, way to stick it to him," sort of thing. But the vast majority are like, "Hey, I appreciate Lauser coming on and sort of talking about his perspective. He could have avoided it." Again, just to reinforce, there are 48 people who didn't change their vote and just stuck with the no. So I think Lauser deserves a lot of credit for coming on and answering.
Yeah. So and again, I still maintain we have got to leave room for people to change their minds. People have got to be allowed to change their minds. And if it's always about, they flip-flopped or whatever, if that's it all the time, it's just really unfortunate. I think sometimes
People get to change their mind, and we get to ask them why they changed their mind.
Your questioning was fair. I wasn't suggesting that at all. It's fair to ask them why. That's why I wanted Representative Lauser to come on. But basically we should be allowed to change our minds. All right, follow us on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter, at Plain Talk ND. It's the same handle on all of them: TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, X, Plain Talk ND. You go to plaintalknd.com, it'll take you straight to the YouTube page. Subscribe to us, and you can subscribe to the podcast anywhere, any of the podcast platforms. You search for Plain Talk, you're going to find us. We're on all of them. Certainly appreciate it. And if you ever, by the way, if you ever have any problems, reach out, subscribing or technical difficulties. I don't know what those would be, but if you do reach out, we'll be happy to help you find our content. Thank you so
And
much.
love the listener feedback. It makes it feel like people are actually listening to us, and that's fun.
It is, and that is the one part I miss from doing talk radio, is that a lot of time the feedback was instantaneous because it was live, right? So you're getting emails, you're getting texts, you're getting calls. And so this isn't quite as interactive. I love the fact that we can have longer form conversations that don't get interrupted. But on the other hand, I like the feedback. I like hearing from the audience. What are they thinking? You know, we've had some criticism, we've had some praise. It's all good. So once again, 701-587-3141. That's call, text, that number. I really appreciate you listening. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
What does it mean for somebody like me who likes to eat?